diving into the phase inverter of the 64 AA763 twin. I was unable to find a schematic for an AA763 twin, but I was able to find schematics for similar AA763 Showman and Super Reverbs. And those schematics show dual 100K plate resistors in the phase inverter. This is 182, and I'm not sure whether this 82 is original. The solder joint here at the node looks untouched. These have been retouched because of this added unnecessary cap. But the tolerance band on that resistor, I guess that's gold, it's just dirty. So I'm thinking that probably is original due to that original looking solder joint there. So 100K on the AA763 schematics, 100K, 82K on this, which leads me to think this is a transitional amp where they had incorporated the changes in the phase inverter, had not incorporated the changes in the filter caps yet, and had not used up all of the tube chart labels yet. The other differences are very minor, pretty much just a 27K resistor in the cathode tail of the LTP. Let's see what this actually measures. Now, some people are going to look at the color bands on this. I am red-green colorblind, so no, I don't. And it measures 21.96, so that's a 22K. This should be 470 ohms. 510, that's still within spec. This 82K measures 86.5K, this 100K, 110. That's all pretty usual drift. These 220Ks here, and the bias grid leak are 228, 227.5, that's well within spec. These mixed resistors, 243.3, 236 rather. That's all within spec. Something I did notice before, no wait, that was on the 68. Pro Reverb, where the grid stoppers are all out of spec. This one's 1.6K. $1.65K, 1.58K, and 1.56K. And the screen grids are all going to get replaced just because, but they are measuring pretty much within tolerance. I may leave those original. So, I don't think I need to make any changes to the phase inverter other than pulling out this 120 picofarad cap. It's a good CDE cap. It can be used for something else. Sorry, I was thinking of that 68 Pro Reverb, where all the components in the phase inverter are out to lunch, and we'll be changing a lot of those on that amp. Sorry that this two amps came at the same time. It's been a few days since I had any quality time with them. And I forgot what I had measured before. Give it a little bit of fresh. Just get that added flux in there. All right. And given the work that I'm going to do on these caps that are getting replaced, I know I'm going to go back and get that little bit of flux off. So let's start with this cap here at the input to the phase inverter. That is non-original. It is the correct value, but it is a film cap, and that is a different sound than the Class 2 ceramic that originally would have been there. Now, some amps from the black panel area, I can't talk, from the black panel era used 500 picofarad caps. I think technically I'm supposed to say picofarad, but I don't like saying that. Pico. It's not a nice sounding word. Sorry to the Greeks or whatever. I guess it's Latin. Pico de Gallo. My solder sucker is getting clogged, so let me sort this out real quick. All right, I'm removing the old solder from these joints because I'm adding a new component, and we'll be adding some more solder there. I didn't remove it here because I wasn't doing much, but here I'm going to make sure I have everything just right. So with the new cap, I can bend the leads beneath the eyelet a little bit, and then I want to add some fresh solder there, but in the process I don't want a puddle to form between the top board and the bottom board. That's how bad things happen down the line. So getting that old solder out is a good thing, and maybe I should have had this cap ready to go, but I didn't. So I'm sorting through the bag of parts that came for this amp to find the cap in question. All right. Prepping the cap. Doop-a-doop-a-doo. Where'd my thingy go? Here's my thingy. It's good to have thingies, don't you think? All right, so that's 0.6. And I use this for a lot of things. Sometimes I get a measurement where that doesn't work. It doesn't go below 0.8. So I can kind of fudge it to 0.75. But with this, I can achieve the same result fairly well. That's where I need to make that bend. You can tell by how casually I'm touching things in here, and I've got stuff, metal things laying places on here, that I've discharged this amp. There is nothing in here waiting to get me. So let me snip it the first time with a little bit of extra length in case I made a mistake measuring it. Doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. Do a test run. That's good. Take off a little bit of that excess that I just left. And now I like to bend the leads over beneath the eyelet a little bit using a dental pick. Ah. So the solder is not being used as glue. When I'm otherwise done, I'll go back through the whole thing, everything I've worked on, and try to make my solder joints look like the original solder joints. As much as possible. Now here we've got replaced caps, one replaced cap in the LFO, and these old discs are notorious for going bad, so we're going to change all those at the same time. Though I do have a plan for that 0.02. This one right here. If I can get it out without crumbling the coating where the leads enter the body. I've got to move the the camera for this a little bit. Sorry. It's not in a friendly position for my right hand to actually do any work. Sounds like high school. I may reuse this original 0.02 earlier in the circuit where a 0.02 was replaced by a film cap. I'll take some measurements and see what that value actually is. First, I want to get the old solder out here. And there is a lot of solder in these eyelets. Especially this one here, where there's a lot of solder and it's gone dull and grainy. All right. I'm going to go ahead and clean that area a little bit. Well, I got some on the brush, like over here, where I was before. That'll just evaporate out. All right, let me measure some things here on these caps. All right, this old 20 now measures 17.2. This old 10 now measures measure anything? 8.3. While I'm in the area measuring, I want to check these bright caps because as I recall, this amp did not sound as bright when the switch was engaged as some others. So. This 120 actually measures 50. And this 120 now measures 46. So, sorry about that. So it's gone from 120 picofarad to 50 and 46 picofarad. That's why those bright caps weren't doing what they ought to do. And you know, it's not a bad sound in the 40 to 50 range. That's what the deluxe reverb uses. But it can be a sign of a weakening cap. Real quick, let me get real close and see if I can see what it says. Maybe the AA763 used a 47 picofarad there instead of the later 120. No, they both say 120. They're just old failing caps. So, got some new 10 nanofarad caps here, but there's a tolerance to caps. Let's see what they actually measure. 10.16, 9.84, 10.73, 10.16. So all these 10 nanofarad caps actually are 10 nanofarad caps. So I will use them with no compunction. Let's measure the new 22 nanofarad caps I have. Let's see where they fall in the scale of things. This 22 measures 18.8. .22 on the dot. .21.5. And 25. So these two are what I would consider to be a true 22. 25 here, and then an 18. And the old one measured, what, 17? 17, 18? That's so 2 minutes ago. I can't remember. Numbers, what are they for? Yeah, 16.76. So this old 20 measures almost 17, and this new 22 measures about 18. And the how audible will that difference be? It's going to depend on where it's used in the circuit. Here, as a high-pass filter, a series of it, it's not going to make a huge difference, but I'm probably going to put this 25 here. That'll give the slowest speed. Down here, we're replacing this cap. It doesn't make as much of a difference because after that, it has a very large impedance to ground through that 3.3 meg resistor, and then the other stuff in the circuit, the reverb mixer and such. So it's got it's a very high impedance node and a very slight variation in the actual capacitance is not going to give you a dramatic change in the amount of low end present. So I'm going to try this original that measures 16 here and see how it sounds. If this thing is, old one is microphonic or leaking DC, away it goes and one of the new blue ones goes in. But if it sounds good and it's just not exactly on spec, so be it. So I'm putting that to the side for now. And I put the 18 to the side, the two 20s to the side. We're going to use this 25 here. If anything, it'll just give a slightest bit of a slower vibrato speed. Given the variation in pots, it's probably not going to be an audible difference. But let me get these 10s installed first. Someday I'll have a tool or something that gets these reeled components out of the stickum easily. I have not discovered what that might be. I'm sure there is a machine for it, but I do not have one. All right, so where'd my pliers go? Aha. Again, just prepping the length, prepping the cap, leads. So I get something like that at this point. Now I'll measure that gap again. It's even less here. Looks like 0.425 for that one, and that one, and that one. All right, good to know. Not as critical. I can eyeball this, so it's about that much from each leg. Now on this 64, I'm putting it to the original 1964 speeds. An easy way to slow the trim is, instead of using 22-10-10 as on the original, use 22-22-10. That slows the minimum while still giving a fairly fast maximum. If you change out that 100K limiting resistor on the speed pot to like a 68K, you can usually have the slow and the stock fast, but I don't find it really that useful. People don't tend to use the fastest possible range on these, but I'll talk to the owners in cases like that. All right. And on this one, which is a wider lead spacing, it only needs about like that. So again, trimming. And these caps are rated for 1,000 volts, so they will last a really, really long time in here. There are other caps I use for this purpose a lot of the time. There's some real nice small ones from Murata and AVX and other companies that are quite nice for this purpose. But in this amp, I wanted to kind of honor the original components as much as possible. And on these 10s, I can do it pretty precisely. On the 22, there's not one available in this color. Well, there actually are. There are some that are available in that color, but they kind of suck in terms of the temperature coefficients. The ones which I use have a much nicer temperature coefficient, but they are blue. Now, if you see me doing stuff that's kind of awkward looking, it's because the camera's in my way. And I need new glasses. And I've been saying that for a while. It's been true for a while. I just keep forgetting to go get some. I gotta make the time. If you're watching this, you must really be into amps, because this is not an exciting thing to do, to watch. But it sure is worth it as far as the sound goes. And part of me really likes the meticulousness of all this, of just really, really taking the time to get this stuff just right in a world of non-repairable things where nothing is of lasting value or consequence. I feel like doing this kind of stuff is kind of an act of rebellion in my own quiet way. All right, now for this cap here. This is the 3.3 nanofarad cap used to feed the reverb return to the reverb pot. And in theory, you're not going to hear any difference between this film cap, which is a good quality film cap. It's an orange drop of some sort. I'll see which one it is in a moment. And the ceramic that I'm going to put in there. But given that this originally would have had a ceramic, and they tend not to fail very often. That's a nice one. It's a 6PS series. Good quality cap. Just not the right one for that purpose, in my opinion. I think it would be much better to put this back to the correct, period correct ceramic. I guess it's important to say period correct rather than correct. One is an observation, the other is an opinion. Though I've not been too terribly shy about expressing opinions on this channel. My friends all make it a bit of a joke that I have opinions on things, and usually not mild ones. All right, that's 1.25. I don't mind if they laugh that I have opinions, as long as they goddamn know that I do. And, you know, they don't have to worry about me being too soft-spoken or shy to let my thoughts be known. You know, and it's to the point where I'd be a real ass, except I'm correct. But I'll bump. If my wife were to watch this video, she'd still be laughing. As I recall, when I played this sample last week in the initial video, aside from the quite dead speakers, the amp was overall sounding pretty good, but the vibrato was a little bit weak. And changing those caps into LFO there might do something towards fixing that. So typically, sometimes when they fail, they just fail and you don't have any LFO, which stands for low frequency oscillation, if you're wondering. I just use terms like LFO and stuff and rarely explain them. That's the oscillation that actually gives the pulse to the lamp that makes the tremolo function. I'll do a video on how that stuff works someday when I have fewer things waiting to get done. Sometimes old caps just mean that there's not enough signal strength for the oscillation to happen. But sometimes you just get reduced strength oscillation. It still works, it still makes the bulb go, but it doesn't make the bulb go as bright. Hit that with a little bit of ISO while I'm in the area. I'll be cleaning the entire board before I'm done. All right, now it's time to do this cap, which is coming out of the second stage of the vibrato circuit, vibrato channel rather. And in the originals was also ceramic. And in my testing, and I have tested all these things, I have literally tested every part of a classic Fender circuit with different materials to see what makes a difference and what does not. And I'm making sure I remove this solder right here. I'm going to hit that with quite a bit of isopropyl before putting the new cap back in place, because this eyelet is usually the one most prone to leaking DC in any Fender, well, any Fender with reverb, because it is right here, 1/4 of an inch from this B+ node, which has a lot of voltage on it, and any moisture or dirt in the board makes that whole area become conductive, and then you get problems at that eyelet, which sometimes exhibit as big buzzes and problems. Most of the time, it just makes for a noisier amp that people don't really realize is noisy because they haven't compared it to one that's not making the noise. You know, it's not like it's zzz. It's just a background white noise that people tend to think is normal in a vintage Fender. That kind of noise is not, in fact, normal in a vintage Fender. Even with carbon composites, these can be very quiet. Anyway, as I was saying a minute ago, I have compared different materials of resistor and capacitor in just about every stage of the AB763 circuit, which is the majority of the Fenders with reverb in the 60s. Super reverb, twin reverb, deluxe reverb, etc., etc. And I have found that this one spot is one of the places where both the carbon composite resistor makes a big difference and the ceramic disc cap makes a difference, and not just ceramic disc, but specifically the Class 2 ceramic disc. All right, that solder joint there looks really fugly. I want to clean that up while I'm in here. That's factory, but it's not a good joint from the factory. It's got a ton of excess solder, and it's gray and grainy. And that cap was just barely tucked into it. That's the cap that feeds the reverb driver stage. Little 500 picofarad. And everything we can do to make that secure makes the reverb that much more reliable. All right. Get some of that fugly old solder off. Making sure that the coating is not too badly damaged. Give that a bit more of a bend than it had originally. All right, that's much more secure. The wire that's going here is this one. It's actually tucked beneath the board, so I don't have to worry about that coming loose. Move this wire out of my way so I can solder here. And yeah, you guys just saw me remove an original factory joint and a rare early 64 twin reverb. And some guys would be up in arms and, oh my God, that I touched an original solder joint to begin with, let alone that I removed it and redid it. It was a bad solder joint in 1963 or 64. It's a bad solder joint now, or it was until about 3 minutes ago. And now it's a good solder joint. And yeah, it lasted all this time, but that was pretty much just luck. And I don't think this amp has really been gigged a lot. So, let's see if the old cap reaches. I don't think it's going to reach there. No, it's not. So I can't reuse this old cap from the tremolo there after all. I'll put that to the side. Got one of these that measures 20 here. And let me get the width on that. All right, 0.85, I think. We got the fat end of 0.8, because I can always fudge it at a bend if I need to. The last video on this amp, I did most of it in fast, what's it called? The opposite of slow-mo, or is it 10 times speed? But this one is just going to be dragging out with talking, because I don't feel like doing all that editing again. And I think, at least in my head, the information I'm giving as I do this says a lot more than a little bit of text up on screen might. Okay. So there's 3 more caps left to go. I'm going to do this 250 picofarad cap here, which has a silver mica. And I'm going to do the 2 120 picofarad bright caps on the volume pots. Because as I heard, and then confirmed with the meter, they are way the hell off their rated capacitance, which could be a sign that the caps are failing or well on their way towards failing. Some variation is fine. Yeah, I think they originally were minus 20% plus 50%. or plus minus 20 certainly. So I wouldn't expect every 120 picofarad cap to measure 120 picofarads. 100 to 140, yes. 47, 50, whatever I measured at the beginning of this video, well, or at least sometime previous in this video, is way out to lunch. And this eyelet here, I'm attempting to remove the solder from here, where that treble cap attaches, is also very close to that B+ node and also often develops leakage. And the leakage that happens there isn't noise, but what it is it's basically a partial bypass of this plate resistor, which means that frequencies over whatever the capacitance of the board is are attenuated, which certainly works against what we want in a treble cap. And so you can have a treble channel that just doesn't have much air or life to it. You know, the goal is not to have nails on the blackboard treble, but to have clarity. All right, so let's put in this Class 2 250 ceramic. As to Class 2, I encourage you to Google it. It's about how the capacitance changes with temperature and to a degree with frequency, and that it introduces nonlinear distortion. I don't mean it sounds like a Boss metal zone, thank God, but it's a whole bunch of stuff that tells our brain that this is interesting to listen to, that something is going on there. It's probably part of our brain, from research I've read, that was developed to detect any sign of predators in the area. Any little leaf rustle or breath sound or noise that should not be there. Our brains are hardwired to say, must pay attention to this. And so when those things happen with things like nonlinear distortion, it wakes up our brain and we start paying very close attention. And we find it very interesting, very engaging. There's a whole bunch of subconscious things happening. And it's all stuff that would drive a hi-fi designer absolutely nuts. But we're not making hi-fis, are we? We're making tube guitar amps. And if you look at the twin reverb here and the Vox AC30 that I often work on, two of the most recorded and desired amps ever, a lot of the things that make them great are actually flaws from an audio design perspective. Certainly the AC30 has even more nonlinear distortion, but the reverb channel of the black panel Fender, be it a twin reverb or a super reverb or what have you, even a little deluxe reverb, has some weird things happening that our brain finds very pleasing and exciting to listen to. That's why you can play a note, a single note on a good example of any of those amps. Clean as can be as far as conventional wisdom of what a clean guitar sound is. And it has a solidness to it in musical context that many earlier solid state and modeling amps could not replicate, where those just kind of disappeared into a wall of everything else. And a lot of that is because none of the cleans in these amps at any real volume, I mean above 2, really are clean. We get to hear compression and strange things happening with the harmonics series and nonlinear distortion, certain frequencies are clean and certain frequencies are dirty. And our brains just eat that up. All right, let me see if I've got some 120 picofarad caps. I'm pretty sure I do. I didn't order any for this because I wasn't expecting to replace those two bright caps, but let me see what I have in my stash. Well, my stash came through. So I'm just going to show one, then we'll do both of them because the process is the same. And sometimes this is more convoluted than others depending on how well it was wrapped to begin with. All right. Where did my stuff go? Doop-a-doop-a-doo. This will work. The little prongs on these bright switches and fenders are way too fragile to use a spring-loaded solder sucker on. They'll break if you look at them too hard. So that's a good place for braid. And let me just get a little bit more out of here. All right, let's see. Original wasn't done too well. It would have been easy for that lead to hit the pot, so make sure that doesn't happen. Let's give it a curve like that. Snip off some excess. So the whole thing's kind of like this at this point. All right. Snip off a good bit of this. All right, through there. This is where a third hand would be handy, but I don't bunch. This wire wants to slip through the grips of the pliers, but if I use too much force, the leads just get all mangled because they're very thin. Give that just a little bit of an angle over, and a little bit of an angle here. Maybe this one first. Damn it. Not the easiest one I've ever done, but it'll be solid. Now that it is physically where I want it to be, let me adjust the leads. Make sure that this top one cannot touch the shell of the pot casing. All right, let me get a little bit more solder on there. Damn it. Nice, pretty red light. Lead bent. Mechanically, that should be very, very good. We'll do the other one real fast, and then we'll see where we're at sound-wise. All right, the one where I wasn't filming was no problem at all. I mentioned in the first video on this amp that it had some liquid spill stuff. They were there by the input jacks on the normal channel. Let me get that off the chassis now while I'm in this area, thinking about it. Hopefully. Well, isopropyl barely made a dent in that. So, I'm gonna do two things. First of all, because it looks like everything just dripped down on these resistors, I'm just gonna give everything in here a spray of deoxit. And let me grab a plug. Make sure I'm getting the contacts really well. Doesn't take much. Alright. Have all that sets up. Move this wire out of the way. And very carefully put a tiny little bit of WD-40 on this part of the chassis. And then wick it up before it gets into any of that wire. I'm just going to let that sit for a little bit and let it do its thing. Make sure that wire is not up against the chassis at all there. That WD-40 is good stuff, but it does not want to come out of wire. So, while that dries, before I clean it, just kind of taking a look at everything we've done. I'm about to fire it up, see how it sounds at this point. We haven't done the power section stuff, but I think everything on the main board, starting from the phase inverter, working way over, is good now. And the bright caps should be doing what they're supposed to do. And in the previous video, we got the bias just right. So I look forward to hearing this in just a minute. All right, most of that stuff over by the normal jack cleaned up, and I'll do a little bit more later. But first of all, let's just test the basic function of the channels. So here's the reverb channel, vibrato channel. A little bit of DC on the input. A little DC on the second grid. That's probably the tube, though I've not cleaned the tube sockets yet, so I'm not going to worry about either of those things yet. So no static on the treble, middle, or bass. Definitely not losing any potential highs over in that area. Like I talked about if there was any leakage there. And the bright switch. Is doing what it ought to do. Let's check out the normal channel real quick. Not going to do this exhaustively. There's some noise when I plug in, plug out. Maybe related to the tubes and maybe related to resistors there. We'll figure that out. Got some DC on the grid of the second stage. Not hearing any nastiness in the pots. There's a rushing water sound on this channel that's not there on the vibrato channel. That new cap is definitely working. There's a little bit of scratchiness, clickiness on that switch. Let me get in there with a little bit of deoxit. Sometimes these old switches just get a little bit noisy, and the only thing you can do is replace them, which I'm not going to do if I can help it on this. As any noise that may introduce is not going to be something done mid-song. So there's a little bit of rushing water. Could be the tube socket needs cleaning. I suspect it's a combination of factors. A little bit of noise when I plug into that as well. Microphonics on V2. V2 also has leaking DC. Well, that seems to be better now. Not gone, but better on the second grid. And on the guitar, still there. I'm not going to plug in a reverb tank right now. Just make sure I get noise as I turn it up. I do, but I have the regular hum of turning up the reverb without the tank attached. I don't have a big, nasty, buzzy sound, so that's good. Let's see how the tremolo is doing. Vibrato, as Leo would call it. Now, I've had people ask, is that sparking supposed to be there in other videos? And sometimes I've had time to reply, other times other people have been nice enough to reply, and sometimes I haven't seen the reply until weeks or more later. So what that flashing is that you see here, that people have thought was sparking in other videos, this circuit is actually driving a neon bulb on this side, and as it lights up, it causes a light-dependent resistor on this side to go from, 10 megs or so down to as close to 0 ohms as possible, which grounds out the grounds out the output of this channel at the time that bulb is illuminated. And when it's in the dark, you don't see it, but when it's in the dark, there's no light hitting it. The intensity is greater. So it'll have a deeper trim when it's actually in the chassis and there's no light hitting it other than the light from the bulb. Definitely seems deeper than it did the other day. A little bit of noise on that pot. I'll go back afterwards with all these with some fader lube. I'm not just cleaning it, I'm also lubricating it, but that's a separate process. That's a very good depth and response and speed range. It might go a little bit faster. I need to measure what that resistor there actually is. Well, you can't see where I'm pointing. There's a 100K resistor here. And that sets the fastest speed possible. I need to make sure that hasn't gotten higher than it ought. That DC that was on the guitar input is almost gone now. And that could literally just be some funk in the tube sockets that I haven't cleaned them out yet. So I'm not going to worry about that until after I have cleaned it all out. Before I do anything else, I'm just going to take some DC measurements on the boards a couple places to see if we have any leakage that might need to be addressed. But so far from what I'm hearing, we're in a really good spot, and we may need to just get to the output stuff in the next day or two. Sorry, the stuff on the floor is in the way of where the legs want to go. So I'm just going to take some DC measurements at some common places. You may hear some noises, sorry. No leakage there, there, there. No leakage in the tone stack on this channel, that's good. $200 millivolts here, so this is a good time to address this. On this cap right here, I've got 200 millivolts. That could be DC leakage in the board here. It could be DC leakage in the board at the other end where the mix resistors are. It's not going to be leakage through this new cap, but it could also be leakage from this DC eyelet here to either of these AC eyelets here. And the yellow one is coming from the reverb channel, the vibrato channel. It's got 40 millivolts, and the blue one here, 200 millivolts. Well, it's spiking between 150 and 200 millivolts. And that's coming from over here. And if it's leakage in the board, as I suspect, many techs would assume it's this cap, and they'd take out this cap and put in an orange drop or whatever, and then the DC would be gone. They'd say, yes, this old blue Ajax was bad. The orange drop was a good cap and fixed it. That can be the case, but I find that it rarely is the case that these blue Ajax caps go bad, with the exception of the 400 volt PI outputs in a AB165 basement. They should have used a 630 volt cap there. But what it often is there's DC present in the board here, just leaking from this high B plus node right here. And the physical act of heating that up with a soldering iron to take out this cap and put in a new one drives enough moisture out of the board that the DC goes away, and they think they fixed it with a bad cap. It wasn't the cap, it was the board. So I'll be revisiting that. Anyway, back to the inspection for DC. Let me turn my damn meter back on. All right. This tone stack. We have no leakage, that's good. Here at this crucial node, half a volt. All right, half a volt there, and that bleeds into half a volt here. And I said the amp was sounding good, and it is. But I guarantee it will sound even better with that half a volt out. And I already did this eyelet. What I need to do is lift all these two plate resistors out and get all this sold out, because it's at 410 volts DC. If there's any leakage in this board, it will certainly get injected in here, and you get half a volt into this eyelet. Let's see what's on a measure just on the board itself. I'm not measuring much. I'm measuring 80 millivolts here, and here I already cleaned, I'm getting 20. So let's go down here to this part of the board. And we got 50 volts here. Sorry, 90 volts here, 89.8 volts here. And this eyelet, real close to it, we're getting that 200 millivolts. Now the board, I'm only getting 23 millivolts. But sometimes there'll be a bridge beneath the board that doesn't show up top. I'm getting 60 volts if I press the board right down at the other end of that, where that blue cap is. So the quick way to do this is put it in standby. And lift. I'm going to lift this blue wire here. And that'll isolate the two ends of the board from each other. And see if the voltage is on the wire or if the voltage is on the eyelet. Sometimes just heating up to do this makes the voltage go away. As I said, people misdiagnose caps, but I didn't heat it very long. So let's see. This wire has I was measuring 2 volts DC on that. I'm getting 60 millivolts here, which is in line with what I was measuring on the board here. But this blue cap, silly Lyle. This blue cap no longer has any resistance to ground, so I'm not going to get an accurate DC reading on it. So it's fluctuating high. If I put a 1 meg resistor from this point to this ground node, I'd be able to measure this accurately. But since I went from 200 millivolts to 50, and now it's down to 30 millivolts at this eyelet, that tells me that the problem is down here at this end. So I suspect we have leakage. And I will deal with that next video because I need to run to the grocery store. I know I said I was done, but I just couldn't keep fiddling with it. Just the very act of desoldering this, removing the old solder, and resoldering it without even using any isopropyl got that from 200 millivolts down to 30 millivolts. So more cleaning there will take care of that. And a little bit of resoldering in this area. Got it from a half a volt at this eyelet to 100 millivolts at this eyelet. So from 500 millivolts to 100 millivolts. But the reason I turned the camera back on is that this yellow wire here has 100 millivolts on its insulation. The cloth itself is at 100 millivolts. The cloth on this blue wire is at 800 millivolts. The cloth on this yellow wire here is at 1.6 volts DC. So the insulation in this amp on these wires has 1.6 on this yellow, about 700 on this blue, and 100 or so on this little bit of yellow wire. Let's test on this one here. 175 millivolts. And if I go through and measure some plate connections, what do I see? 1.2 volts on this insulation. You can sure hear that. There's a solder joint or something that's not quite happy there. And 40 millivolts on that one. 400 millivolts, 20 millivolts, 72, 38, 141, 300, and 20. So a lot of the old cloth insulation in this amp has absorbed moisture to the point where it has become conductive. When your insulation is conductive, that's not a good thing. Now this one here was the one that was at 1 volts. Now it's at half a volt because I moved it. Now it's at 850, now it's at half. So that's fun. See if this is staying low. Yeah, it's staying low, down to 30 millivolts now. But this one here is 1.5 volts. It was at 1.6. So there are a lot of ways to do this. On some old amps, I've had to replace all the blue and yellow wires going across the board that carries B+. I don't want to do that. That's plan C. Plan A, which has worked a lot in the past, is that I literally soak everything except the labels on these blue Ajax caps in isopropyl alcohol. Just soak the hell out of it and let it sit in the sun for a couple hours, and I hit it up with the heat gun and get all the oil. It'll drive all the old moisture and gunk out of these wires. This cotton cloth insulation becomes just as, doesn't, not as conductive, but it becomes conductive just like the old fiber board. As it absorbs moisture, it gets any particles that are in the air over the years, smoke, dust, whatever. And as you can tell, the insulation no longer insulates. If one of the problems here is this little bit of yellow wire goes beneath this board and runs next to this B plus connection, this plate connection. And so if there's some contamination on this cloth wire beneath the board, that can be something which is really hard to undo. What I have done in the past is I pull this wire out and replace it with a new length of yellow cloth covered proper wire that goes to this same connection point just without snaking beneath the board first, because that's a good way to trap yuck. I know this is a very long video, and you may not care about this kind of stuff, but this is the stuff that turns a pretty good amp into a great amp. And I just don't see many techs doing this, and it's a shame because it really transforms this into the kind of amp that you heard on all those great records and wish you could get that sound, but the amps you tried just don't sound like that. Well, this one doesn't either yet, but it will.